People always say that friendships come and go, that nothing lasts forever. But for most of my life, I thought I was the exception. To me, real friendship wasn't just about hanging out or sharing hobbies. It was about loyalty, trust, and knowing there was someone who would have your back no matter what. That someone was Kalen. He wasn't just a friend. He felt like the brother I never had. From the time we were kids, we were inseparable. We survived awkward school dances together, late night cramming before exams, and endless summer adventures that felt like they'd last forever. If I ever got into trouble, he was the one sneaking out of his house to cover for me. If something good happened, he was the first person I told. My family adored him. My mom would joke that she had 2 sons, and Kalen was always welcome at our dinner table. He was there for birthdays, holidays, even random Tuesday nights when we'd end up playing board games until midnight. Over the years, he stopped feeling like a guest. He was part of the household. My sister thought of him as her protective older brother, too. In every way that mattered, he was family. Sure, we weren't perfect. We had our share of petty arguments. Who was better at basketball? Which movie deserved the higher rating? The kind of stupid debates you forget about 5 minutes later. But no matter what, we always circled back to each other. There was an unspoken certainty between us. No fight, no distance, no obstacle could really pull us apart. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, it's almost painful to remember how confident I was in that bond. Because when life finally threw something heavy at me, something I couldn't just laugh off or ignore, I realized that maybe our friendship wasn't as unshakable as I had imagined. The cracks had probably been forming for a while, but I didn't notice until it was too late. Back then, though, I couldn't have guessed what was coming. I felt untouchable with Kalen by my side, and I truly believed that when the storm hit, he'd be the one holding the umbrella with me. I just didn't know that the storm would show me a very different side of him. The turning point came out of nowhere, the way life-changing news often does. One moment, everything felt normal, and the next, my entire world was spinning out of control. It started with my dad collapsing at work. At first, we thought it was just exhaustion, maybe stress catching up with him. But when the doctors ran their tests, the truth hit like a freight train. He had a serious heart condition that would require surgery and a long recovery. Suddenly, the strongest man I knew, the one who always carried the weight of our family on his shoulders, looked fragile in a hospital bed. I remember the first night after the diagnosis, sitting in that cold, sterile room with machines beeping and my mom trying her best to stay strong for everyone. I felt like I was drowning. My younger sister clung to me, terrified, and for the first time, I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how to reassure her, or my mom, or even myself. All I knew was that we were facing something huge, something that could change everything. Naturally, I turned to Kalen. He was always my anchor, the one person outside my family who could steady me when the world felt too heavy. I called him that night, my voice shaking as I told him what happened. I half expected him to show up at the hospital immediately, just like he had for every other crisis in my life. The car accident in high school, the time I broke my arm, even the stupid drama after my first breakup. But this time was different. His voice on the other end of the phone didn't carry the urgency I was desperate for. He said he was sorry, that it sounded rough, but he was caught up with other stuff and couldn't come by right then. He promised we'd talk soon, maybe grab lunch when things calmed down. I brushed it off at first. Everyone has their own life, right? Maybe he really was busy. But when days turned into weeks and Kalen still hadn't come to the hospital or even checked in more than a casual text, I started to feel the sting of disappointment. Meanwhile, my family needed me more than ever. I was juggling school, visiting hours, helping my mom manage bills, and trying to keep my sister's spirits up. Every day felt like running a marathon with no finish line. And every day, I kept thinking Kalen should be here. Not because I wanted him to fix everything, but because I needed my best friend to stand beside me when I couldn't stand on my own. Instead, the silence grew louder. His absence wasn't just noticeable, it was crushing. I catch myself staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came, a call that never rang. The more I tried to justify it, maybe he didn't know what to say, maybe he felt awkward about hospitals, the harder it became to ignore the truth. He simply wasn't there. And As much as I wanted to pretend it didn't matter, the seed of doubt had been planted. For the first time in my life, I wondered if Kalen and I were really as unshakable as I thought. At first, I tried to convince myself that Kalen's distance was just a temporary phase. People get overwhelmed, I told myself. Maybe he was dealing with something of his own that he wasn't ready to talk about. I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt because that's what best friends do. They forgive, they understand, they wait. But as weeks passed, the excuses became harder to swallow. Whenever I texted him to hang out, his responses were vague. Maybe next week, I've got a lot going on, or sometimes no response at all. When he did answer, it felt forced, as if he were just checking a box rather than actually wanting to connect. The real breaking point came one Saturday evening. My mom had just spent hours at the hospital with my dad, and she came home completely drained. I was trying to cook dinner, manage my sister's homework meltdown, and process my own stress all at once. In a desperate moment, I called Kalen, hoping he might finally step up, maybe come over, distract my sister, or at least talk me through it. He answered after the third ring, his voice distracted. In the background, I could hear laughter, music, the unmistakable sound of a party. "Hey, what's up?" he said like nothing was wrong. I explained everything. My mom was exhausted, my sister was in tears. I felt like I was crumbling. I needed someone. I'll never forget his response. "Dude, I get it, but I can't just leave. Everyone's here, and it'd be super awkward. You'll be fine. Just hang in there. You'll be fine." Those 3 words burned into me like fire. For years, I had dropped everything for him. When he failed a class in college, I stayed up all night helping him cram for a retake. When his parents were fighting, I was the one who picked him up and let him crash on my couch. I was his safety net. And now, when I needed even a fraction of that loyalty, he brushed me off for a party. Something cracked inside me that night. Not a clean break, but the kind of fracture that doesn't heal easily. For the first time, I stopped seeing Kalen as my rock and started seeing him as unreliable. Over the following days, his absence became a presence in itself. I'd scroll through social media and see him out with other friends, smiling in photos, posting stories about late-night adventures. All while I was stuck between hospital visits and sleepless nights, wondering how the person I trusted most could simply vanish from my life when I needed him the most. When I finally confronted him about it, he shrugged it off. "Man, I just don't do well with heavy stuff. Hospitals, family drama, it's not really my thing. I thought you'd understand." I stared at him, speechless. "Not really your thing? Since when was friendship optional? Something you only showed up for when it was convenient or fun?" That was the moment I realized our friendship wasn't what I thought it was. The foundation we'd built over years wasn't solid. It was cracked, fragile, maybe even an illusion. And yet, despite all that, I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Some part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Kalen would wake up and realize how much he was hurting me. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered the truth. This was only the beginning of the end. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, whispered updates from doctors, and sleepless nights on an uncomfortable couch in the waiting room. My family was barely holding it together, and neither was I. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Kalen's absence. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, those words he'd said. "It's not really my thing." As if my family's suffering, my suffering, was some optional drama he could opt out of. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Anger replaced sadness, and resentment began to gnaw at me every time I saw his name pop up online, laughing and thriving while I felt like I was drowning. Finally, I decided I couldn't let it slide anymore. I needed answers. One night, after another long day at the hospital, I drove straight to Kalen's place. I didn't text him ahead of time, didn't warn him. I just showed up, pounding on his door until he finally opened it, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Man, what's your problem?" he asked, as if I were the one being unreasonable. I pushed past him into the apartment. "My problem? My problem is that my family is falling apart, and you've been nowhere. Not once have you shown up. Not one text to ask how my dad's doing. Not one call to check on me. Nothing." Kalen crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "I told you, I don't deal well with this kind of stuff. I don't know what you expect from me." I could feel my voice rising, the dam breaking. I expect you to be my friend. Isn't that what best friends do? We've been through everything together, Kalen. Everything. And now, when I need you the most, you vanish. Do you even care? He flinched at that, but only for a second. Then his face twisted into something cold. You're being dramatic. Just because I don't want to sit around in a depressing hospital doesn't mean I don't care. You're putting all this pressure on me, like it's my responsibility to fix your life. It's not. That stung more than I could put into words. I wasn't asking him to fix anything. I just needed him to be there, to sit with me in the silence, to remind me I wasn't alone. But to him, that was too much. The silence between us stretched heavy, suffocating. Finally, I said what had been clawing at the back of my mind. You know what, Kalen? Maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't your responsibility. But don't call yourself my best friend if you can't even show up when it matters. For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but he didn't say a word. He just looked away, jaw tight, arms still crossed like a shield. I left his apartment that night with my chest aching, my hands shaking, and a hollow feeling in my stomach. The person I thought would stand by me through anything had just shown me how conditional his loyalty really was. Driving home, I realized something I never thought I'd admit. Maybe I didn't know Kalen as well as I believed. Maybe our friendship wasn't built on loyalty, but on convenience. And if that was true, then I had to start asking myself a terrifying question. Had I already lost him? After that night at Kalen's apartment, something inside me broke. I'd gone there hoping for clarity, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, I walked away with the crushing realization that the friend I thought I knew no longer existed, or maybe he never had. The following days felt heavier than usual. Every trip to the hospital, every hushed conversation with doctors, every moment of watching my dad hooked up to machines. All of it pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Normally, Kalen would have been the one I leaned on in moments like this. But now, there was only silence. It wasn't just the absence of his presence. It was the echo of what that absence meant. He wasn't busy. He wasn't unreachable. He was choosing not to be there. And that hurt more than any excuse he could have given. But something strange began to happen in the void he left behind. Other people I hadn't expected, started showing up. My cousin, who I barely talked to outside of holidays, brought me coffee one morning and stayed with me for hours. A coworker sent a message offering to cover my shift so I could get some rest. Even a nurse, someone who had no obligation to me whatsoever, would pause to ask how I was holding up. It wasn't grand gestures. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And it made me realize that maybe I'd put too much faith in one person, when in truth, there were others willing to care if I just let them in. Still, the ghost of Kalen haunted me. I'd scroll past his posts online, smiling faces at parties, road trips, late-night laughs, and feel that same burn in my chest. It was like he had moved on with his life, while I was stuck in the trenches, fighting battles he didn't even want to acknowledge. One night, after another endless day, I sat alone in my car in the hospital parking lot, phone in hand. I stared at his contact name, my thumb hovering over the call button. Part of me still wanted to reach out, to hear his voice, to cling to the friendship we had built over the years. But another part of me knew that call would only end in disappointment. For the first time, I didn't press it. I let the screen go dark and leaned back against the seat. The silence was deafening, but also felt freeing. Maybe holding on to Kalen was what was keeping me from healing. Maybe the version of him I missed was just a memory, not the reality anymore. That night, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to chase him anymore. If he wanted to be part of my life, he would have to make that choice himself. It hurt. God, it hurt more than I can describe. But there was also a strange strength in finally letting go of the rope I'd been tugging on for so long. Because sometimes, no matter how much history you share, you have to accept when someone has already walked away. And the cruel irony was, just as I was beginning to let go of him, things at home reached their most critical point yet. The turning point came one late evening when the doctors finally gave us the words we had both dreaded and prayed for. My father had stabilized. It wasn't a miraculous recovery, but it was hope, a fragile thread that we could finally cling to after weeks of uncertainty. I remember stepping outside the hospital, the cool night air filling my lungs for the first time in what felt like ages. My mom was inside, crying tears of relief instead of despair, and I just needed a moment to breathe. My instinct, almost like muscle memory, was to reach for my phone and text Kalen. Dad's going to be okay. We're finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. My thumb hovered over the screen, but then I froze. Why would I send this to him? What had he done to earn the right to share in this moment? He hadn't been there for the sleepless nights, the fear, the suffocating uncertainty. He had chosen to look away. And suddenly, I realized that sharing this with him wouldn't feel like relief. It would feel like betrayal to myself, to my family, to everyone who had actually been there. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The message I wanted to send wasn't for him. Instead, I found myself calling my cousin, the one who had shown up with coffee on those impossible mornings. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Kalen never reached out. Now when my dad came home. Now when I finally started sleeping again. Now when life began, slowly, painfully, to feel normal. Our friendship, once the most defining part of my life, ended not with a fight, but with silence. And maybe that's what made it sting the most. Months later, I ran into him by chance at a grocery store. He smiled like nothing had changed, like we were still those two kids who told each other everything. For a moment, I almost let myself believe it. But then I remembered all the empty nights, all the unanswered calls, all the times I had begged silently for him to care, and realized that smile didn't mean anything anymore. We exchanged a few polite words, nothing more. And as I walked away, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt something unexpected, peace. Because by then, I understood something I hadn't before. People reveal who they truly are when life gets hard. And sometimes the people you think will stand by you will be the very first to leave. It doesn't make the memories worthless, and it doesn't erase the bond you once had. But it does mean you have to accept the truth. Not everyone is meant to stay. Kalen was my best friend, and losing him during my family's crisis was one of the most painful experiences I've ever endured. But also taught me to stop holding on to people who've already let go, to value the ones who do show up, even if they aren't the ones you expected. Because in the end, loyalty isn't measured by history, or by words, or even by promises. It's measured by presence, by the people who stand beside you when the world is falling apart, and who don't let go of your hand, no matter how heavy it gets.